Kāinga Ora says it's taking a firmer approach to rent debt. Under a new policy, tenants who rack up more than 12 weeks of unpaid rent will be at risk of eviction. But the Public Housing Agency also plans to forgive more than $8 million worth of rent debt, considered unlikely to be paid back. Zane Small sat down with Kāinga Ora Chief Executive Matt Crockett.
This 236 home development in Auckland's Avondale represents just 0.3% of the 75,000 homes owned by Kāinga Ora, New Zealand's largest landlord. So when tenants get behind on their rent, it constitutes millions of dollars of debt.
We've got the rent arrears from 21.6 million down to just over 16.1 million. So we're making progress, but we don't think that progress is happening as fast as we'd like.
Matt Crockett has been Chief Executive of Kāinga Ora since September. He was appointed by the government's refreshed board with an expectation to improve the Public Housing Agency's financial performance. So starting from today, a crackdown on tenants with overdue rent.
We've announced a new, clearer and firmer policy around rent arrears.
Tenants who rack up more than 12 weeks of rent arrears will be at risk of eviction.
If they need help, we'll try and broker it, but at the end of the day, the rent must get paid, and if they're unable to do that, unwilling to do that, particularly if they're unwilling to engage, then we will, as needed, terminate tenancies.
Brooke Stanley Powell, who works to end youth homelessness, is concerned.
We already know that on the front line it's impossible to get into emergency housing, that they're already evicting people who have been displaying antisocial behaviour. And they've shut down a lot of emergency accommodation places, and so the issue of homelessness is on the rise.
Kāinga Ora has about 75,000 tenants, and the 16.1 million in rent arrears is owed collectively by about 7,500 of them, roughly 10%. Less than 3%, close to 2,000 tenants, owe more than 12 weeks' worth of rent. To give them a realistic chance of paying it off, Kāinga Ora will forgive up to $8.3 million of debt, but only for tenants who are actively paying it off.
And if money is the centre of our decision making, it means it comes at the cost of the well-being of not only our children, our families, our communities, and it increases harm and risk for all of us.
Rent debt to Kāinga Ora rose to a peak of $21.6 million in January 2024. Matt Crockett partly blames that rise on the Sustaining Tenancies framework that aimed to keep tenants in their homes. In March last year, the government instructed Kāinga Ora to end it.
It was certainly a consequence of the Sustaining Tenancies framework that made it unclear for our tenant managers and unclear for the tenants around, well, what is acceptable.
Some very antisocial and disruptive behaviour and harassment even was being allowed to continue under that previous policy. So no, I wouldn't reinstate it exactly as it was, but I do think we need to have some responsibility on the part of Kāinga Ora for making sure that people, where they are being moved, are rehoused elsewhere.
But as Kāinga Ora's financial woes rise, so do the government's expectations to fix them.
Well, Zane's with me now. Kia ora, Zane. So you've got a bit more detail for us on how Kāinga Ora will help the tenants that need to pay off that debt.
Yes, but first of all, for those who aren't familiar with how Kāinga Ora works, most tenants pay what's called income-related rent, which is typically no more than 25% of their income. Now, in the most extreme case, I'm told one tenant racked up 178 weeks of rent debt, and they're part of that 3% of tenants who owe more than 12 weeks worth of rent. So to help them repay their debt, Kāinga Ora has agreed to reduce their debt down to 12 weeks at a cost of around $8.3 million, which I mentioned in my story, and that's only if they make an effort to pay it off. Kāinga Ora says it won't affect its financial position because that debt was already treated as doubtful.
OK, and it'll make it a bit more manageable for them. Zane, thanks so much.